a single piece of paper, stood between 16-year-old Zola Johnson and her dream. A first-class ticket to her future, paid for by one of the most prestigious science institutions in the world. But that ticket clutched in her hand meant nothing to the man staring down at her, with eyes as cold as the Chicago wind whipping outside the terminal window. He was Captain Marcus Thorne, a man with wings on his chest and ice in his veins. In his mind, he was the unquestionable authority, the king of his metal bird. And he had just made a decision that would not only shatter a young girl's world, but would also ignite a firestorm of consequences that would cost him everything. This is the story of how one pilot's ugly prejudice met immovable justice, and how the sky itself rejected a man who believed he ruled it. The air in Chicago's O'Hare International Airport hummed with a unique kind of energy, a symphony of rolling suitcases, muffled announcements, and the low, constant thrum of anticipation. For 16-year-old Zola Johnson, it was the soundtrack to the first day of the rest of her life. She clutched the strap of her backpack, the fabric worn smooth from years of carrying textbooks that weighed more than she did. Inside that backpack, nestled between a copy of Fundamentals of Astrodynamics and a well-loved notebook filled with complex propulsion equations, was her laptop. On that laptop was the culmination of 3 years of relentless work, a simulation of a low-thrust trajectory for an interplanetary probe, a project that had won her the coveted internship at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California. Zola was not just a bright student. She was a prodigy. While other kids her age were navigating the social minefields of high school, Zola was navigating orbital mechanics. She saw the universe not as a collection of distant twinkling lights, but as a grand, elegant puzzle governed by the laws of physics, a puzzle she was born to help solve. This internship wasn't just a summer program. It was her Apollo 11, her personal giant leap. Her ticket, printed on crisp cardstock, felt warm in her hand. First class seat 2A. JPL had insisted on it. "You're a VIP, Zola," her mentor, Dr. Anya Sharma, had told her over the phone, her voice warm with pride. "We want you to arrive rested and ready to change the world." The thought of it still made Zola's cheeks flush. She had never flown first class. Heck, she had only flown twice in her life, both times in cramped economy seats for academic decathlons. She smoothed down her simple black dress, a concession to looking professional, though she felt more comfortable in jeans and a hoodie emblazoned with the chemical formula for dopamine. She checked her reflection in the polished surface of a closed kiosk. Her hair was neatly braided, her expression a mixture of profound excitement and deep-seated anxiety. She looked so young. She felt so young. Walking through the terminal, she was an island of quiet focus in a river of chaos. She sidestepped a frantic family, offered a small smile to a frustrated businessman on his phone, and finally saw her destination, Gate C-17. The sign above it read, Los Angeles, LAX. Her heart did a little flutter kick. This was it. The boarding area was already crowded. She found an empty seat near the window and watched the ground crew moving with practiced efficiency on the tarmac below. The aircraft, a massive Boeing 707, operated by Transcontinental Airlines, stood majestically at the jet bridge, its tail painted with the airline's familiar blue and gold swoosh. It looked like a promise. A vehicle to her destiny. She pulled out her phone and saw a text from her mum. "Did you get there okay, Star Girl? Call us when you land. We are bursting with pride." Zola smiled, typing a quick reply. "All good, Mum. At the gate. It's really happening. She put her phone away as the gate agent, a harried-looking woman named Sarah, made the first announcement. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We would like to begin pre-boarding for Flight 849 with service to Los Angeles. At this time, we invite our active duty military personnel and families traveling with small children to approach the gate. Zola's pulse quickened. Next would be first class. She took a deep breath, the sterile, recycled air of the airport filling her lungs. She had double-checked everything. Her ID was in the front pocket of her bag. Her boarding pass was in her hand. She had followed every rule, filled out every form, and exceeded every expectation to get to this point. She had earned this. We now invite our first-class passengers to board at this time through the priority lane. That was her cue. Zola stood up, her legs feeling a little shaky. She joined the short line of well-dressed business travelers, feeling a familiar twinge of imposter syndrome. They all looked like they belonged here, with their expensive briefcases and air of casual authority. Zola felt like a kid playing dress-up. She reminded herself of Dr. Sharma's words. "You are a VIP." As she reached the front of the line, a man in a crisp pilot's uniform stepped out from the jet bridge, speaking in a low, sharp tone to the gate agent. He was tall and imposing, with silver-streaked hair and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. The name tag on his chest read Captain Marcus Thorne. He had an air of absolute unyielding command. He glanced over the handful of passengers in the priority lane, and his eyes, a piercing shade of steel blue, snagged on Zola. It was just a glance, a flicker of an eye, but it felt heavy, laden with something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't curiosity. It was appraisal, and then dismissal. He turned back to the gate agent, said something final, and then strode back onto the jet bridge without a second look. Zola pushed the unsettling moment from her mind. It was probably nothing. She was just nervous. She stepped forward and handed her boarding pass and ID to Sarah, the gate agent. "Good afternoon," Zola said, her voice clear and steady. Sarah offered a tired smile. "Good afternoon. Welcome aboard." She took the ticket and placed it on the scanner. A cheerful beep sounded. "Enjoy your flight, Ms. Johnson. You're in 2A, on your left." Zola felt a wave of relief wash over her. She smiled back, a genuine, radiant smile. "Thank you. I will." She took her ticket back and took her first step onto the jet bridge, her heart soaring. The cool, quiet corridor felt like a portal to her future. She was just a few feet from the aircraft, a few hours from JPL, a lifetime away from the small apartment where she'd first dreamed of the stars. But she only made it 3 steps before a voice, cold and hard as iron, stopped her in her tracks. "Hold on a minute." It was Captain Thorne. He had re-emerged from the aircraft and was standing arms crossed, blocking her path. His face was a mask of stern authority, his eyes narrowed. "There's a problem with your ticket." The cheerful hum of the jet bridge's ventilation system suddenly sounded like a roar in Zola's ears. The world seemed to shrink to the narrow confines of the corridor and the imposing figure of the man standing before her. "A problem," Zola repeated, her voice barely a whisper. She looked down at the boarding pass in her hand, the bold letters First Class and Seat 2A staring back at her. It had just scanned perfectly. Captain Marcus Thorne didn't look at the ticket. He didn't look at the gate agent who was now peering anxiously from her station. He looked only at Zola, his gaze sweeping over her simple dress, her worn backpack and her braided hair. It was a look that stripped away her accomplishments, her intelligence, her very identity, and replaced them with a single unspoken assumption. You do not belong here. The scanner can be faulty, he said, his voice clipped and devoid of any warmth. Let me see that. He didn't ask. He commanded. Zola's hand trembled slightly as she held out the boarding pass. Thorne snatched it from her fingers, his knuckles brushing against hers. He held it up, scrutinizing it, as if it were a poorly forged document. The silence stretched thick and uncomfortable. A few other first-class passengers behind Zola began to murmur, their impatience growing. This is unusual, Thorne announced, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. He turned to Sarah, the gate agent, who had now stepped onto the jet bridge. Sarah, did you verify this? Sarah's face flushed with a mixture of confusion and intimidation. Yes, Captain. It scanned through just fine. The name matches the manifest. Zola Johnson, seat 2A. Thorne ignored her confirmation. He turned his cold gaze back to Zola. Who purchased this ticket for you? He demanded. The question hung in the air, heavy with insinuation. He wasn't asking for information. He was issuing a challenge. Zola's spine stiffened. The initial shock was beginning to curdle into a slow, burning anger. She had been questioned her whole life by teachers who were surprised by her test scores, by fellow students who couldn't believe she was in their advanced placement classes. But this was different. This was raw, public humiliation. It was purchased by my internship program, Zola said, her voice finding its strength. The Jet Propulsion Laboratory. A flicker of something disbelief, perhaps even contempt, crossed Thorne's face. JPL, NASA's JPL. Yes, sir, Zola said, forcing a respectful tone she did not feel. I'm starting a summer internship there. Thorne let out a short, incredulous laugh. It wasn't a sound of amusement. It was a sound of dismissal. Right. Look, I don't know what kind of story you're trying to pull, but we have protocols. There's been a rash of credit card fraud with high-value tickets, and frankly, this situation has all the red flags. Red flags? Zola's voice rose slightly. What red flags? My ticket scanned. My ID matches. What is the problem? The problem, young lady, Thorne said, stepping closer, using his height to loom over her, is that I am the pilot in command of this aircraft. My authority is absolute when it comes to the safety and security of my flight, my crew, and my passengers. And right now my gut tells me something is wrong. The words safety and security were like weapons designed to silence any opposition. Behind her, Zola could hear the other passengers growing more restless. One businessman muttered, "For God's sake, just sort it out. We have a schedule to keep." An elderly woman with kind eyes who had been standing behind Zola spoke up. "Excuse me, Captain, but the girl's ticket scanned fine. Can't we just move along?" Thorne shot her a withering glare. "Ma'am, this is a security matter. Please remain patient." He turned back to Zola, his expression hardening into a final verdict. "I'm not comfortable with this. I'm not allowing you to board." The words hit Zola like a physical blow. A cold dread spread through her chest. "You can't do that," she stammered. "I have to be in Los Angeles this evening. I have orientation tomorrow morning." "I can and I am," Thorne stated flatly. He handed the ticket back to Sarah, not to Zola. "Sarah, find this passenger another flight, an economy seat, after we've had a chance to fully verify the payment with corporate. We're already behind schedule." He was demoting her, casting her out. It wasn't about the ticket. It was never about the ticket. It was about him, his power, and the fact that he could not reconcile the image of the young black girl in front of him with the seat number printed on her boarding pass. Tears of frustration and fury pricked at Zola's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give him the satisfaction. "This is not right," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "You have no reason to do this." "My reason," Thorne said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl, "is that I am the captain. That is the only reason I need. You are not boarding my aircraft. End of discussion." He turned on his heel, expecting her to retreat, to accept her dismissal. The other passengers just stared, some with pity, others with annoyance, but none intervening further. Sarah, the gate agent, looked helpless, wringing her hands. "Miss I'm so sorry. Please come back to the desk with me. We'll try to sort something out." The jet bridge, once a portal to her future, now felt like a cage. Her dream was slipping away, being stolen from her by the arbitrary, prejudiced whim of one powerful man. For a moment, Zola felt a crushing wave of despair. It seemed like the end of the line. Captain Thorne had won. He had all the power. But he and everyone else standing there had failed to notice one other passenger, a man who had been standing quietly at the back of the priority line, watching the entire exchange with a calm, analytical gaze. He was unassuming, dressed in a simple traveler's attire of a polo shirt and slacks. He hadn't said a word. He just watched. And as Captain Thorne made his final authoritative pronouncement and turned his back on the distraught teenager, the quiet man took a deliberate step forward. His movements were economical and precise, and his voice, when he finally spoke, cut through the tense air like a surgeon's scalpel. "Captain Thorne." The voice was not loud, but it possessed an undeniable weight, a tone of command that instantly silenced the murmurs and drew every eye. Thorne stopped and turned, irritation flashing across his face. "What is it now? Passengers need to clear the jet bridge." The quiet man took another step forward into the space between the pilot and Zola. He held up a small black leather wallet, flipping it open to reveal the gleaming gold badge and credentials within. "Federal Air Marshal Service," he said, his voice perfectly level. "My name is Agent David Chen. You and I need to have a conversation, right now." Agent David Chen had boarded hundreds of flights. His job was to be invisible, to blend into the tapestry of travelers until he was needed. He was a master of observation, a student of human behavior in the pressurized ecosystem of air travel. He could spot the subtle tells of a nervous flyer, the forced casualness of a smuggler, the aggressive posture of someone looking for a confrontation. And from the moment Captain Marcus Thorne had stepped onto the jet bridge, Agent Chen's internal alarms had been quietly, persistently ringing. He had been at the back of the priority line, reviewing flight details on his secured device, when Thorne appeared. Chen noticed the pilot's rigid posture, the proprietary way he surveyed the passengers as if they were trespassers in his private domain. Then came the glance at Zola Johnson. It was a micro-expression, lasting less than a second, but Chen's training allowed him to read it perfectly. A flash of surprise, followed by suspicion, and then a hardening of the features into a mask of authority. It was a look Chen had seen before, a look that often preceded an abuse of power. He remained quiet, observing. He watched as the young girl Zola handed over her ticket with a polite smile. He heard the clear affirmative beep of the scanner. In a normal world, that should have been the end of it. But Thorne had re-emerged, manufacturing a conflict out of thin air. As the confrontation unfolded, Chen analyzed every detail. Thorne's language was a classic power play. He used jargon like protocols and red flags to create a veneer of legitimacy. He invoked safety and security as a shield to deflect any questioning of his motives. His body language was overtly aggressive, puffing out his chest, stepping into Zola's personal space, using his height to intimidate. Conversely, Chen watched Zola with growing admiration. She was clearly distressed, her knuckles white where she gripped her backpack strap, but she did not break. Her voice trembled, but her words were logical and her demeanor respectful, even in the face of blatant disrespect. She stated facts, her ticket was valid. Her ID matched her internship was real. She was fighting back not with aggression, but with dignity. Chen knew he had to intervene. The situation had escalated beyond a simple customer service issue. It was now a potential violation of federal regulations. The pilot in command has broad authority, but that authority is not absolute. It cannot be used to arbitrarily discriminate against a passenger without a specific articulable security threat. And Thorne's gut feeling did not qualify. In fact, Thorne himself was becoming the biggest security risk on the flight. An emotionally compromised pilot, willing to groundlessly target a passenger, was a pilot whose judgment could not be trusted. He had waited for the right moment. Intervening too early could make things worse, escalating the pilot's defensiveness. He needed Thorne to fully commit, to draw a line in the sand from which he could not retreat. Thorne's final declaration. "You are not boarding my aircraft. End of discussion." Was that line? It was a clear, unambiguous abuse of his authority. That's when Chen made his move. When he spoke Thorne's name, the pilot's reaction was predictable annoyance and dismissal. But the moment Chen identified himself, the entire atmosphere on the jet bridge shifted. The power dynamic which Thorne had so carefully constructed around himself instantly inverted. The gold badge of the Federal Air Marshal Service outranked the 4 stripes on a pilot's epaulets. Thorne's arrogant expression faltered. A flicker of shock, then disbelief registered in his eyes. He stared at Chen's credentials as if he couldn't process what he was seeing. An Air Marshal. Here on his flight. This is a misunderstanding, Agent," Thorne stammered, his bravado evaporating like spilled fuel on hot tarmac. Chen did not acknowledge the backpedaling. His focus was on de-escalation and control. "There's no misunderstanding, Captain," he said, his voice remaining calm and low. "You've created a public disturbance and singled out a passenger without a verifiable cause. That makes you a potential flight risk. I need you to step aside with me. Now." He gestured towards the small alcove near the aircraft's door, a space out of the direct line of sight of the other passengers. He then turned his attention to Zola. His entire demeanor softened. The hard, authoritative agent was replaced by a man offering gentle reassurance. "Miss Johnson," he said, making direct eye contact. "I am truly sorry for what you just experienced. This should not have happened. Can I please see your boarding pass and ID?" His tone was respectful, a stark contrast to Thorne's accusatory demands. Zola, who was still reeling from the pilot's decree, looked at Agent Chen with wide, uncertain eyes. She slowly handed him her documents. Chen examined them for less than 5 seconds. "Everything seems perfectly in order. Please give me a moment to resolve this. Your seat is waiting for you." He gave her a small, encouraging nod before turning his attention back to the now pale pilot. Thorne, however, was not ready to surrender his perceived kingdom. A spark of his old arrogance returned. "Agent, with all due respect, you're overstepping. I made a command decision based on my experience. Your experience led you to publicly harass a teenage girl." Chen countered, his voice losing its softness and regaining its steel edge. "You questioned the validity of a verified ticket based on nothing more than your own prejudice. You have delayed this flight and created an unstable environment before we've even pushed back from the gate. You have demonstrated exceptionally poor judgment. So no. Captain, I am not overstepping. I am doing my job. Now, are you going to step aside with me, or do I need to have this conversation in front of every passenger on your manifest? The threat was clear. The public humiliation that Thorne had tried to inflict on Zola was now being aimed directly back at him. Defeated, Thorne's shoulders slumped. He cast one last venomous look at Zola before turning and walking stiffly into the alcove with Agent Chen. The remaining passengers on the jet bridge stared in stunned silence. The businessman who had been complaining about the delay was now wide-eyed. The elderly woman, Eleanor Vance, gave Zola a supportive smile and a thumbs up. Sarah, the gate agent, looked as if she might faint from a combination of shock and relief. Zola stood there, trembling, clutching her backpack strap. The world had tilted on its axis, and then just as suddenly righted itself. The wall of authority that had blocked her path had not just been cracked, it had been summarily demolished by a quiet observer who carried a power far greater than a pilot's ego. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but for the first time in 10 agonizing minutes, she felt a fragile glimmer of hope. Justice, it turned out, sometimes flew commercial. Inside the small alcove, out of direct view, but still within earshot of the flight attendants preparing the galley, the confrontation reached its climax. The space was tight, forcing a proximity that amplified the tension. Captain Thorne, stripped of his public stage, attempted to regain control. "Listen, Agent," he began, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Let's be reasonable. I have a flight to command. I've been flying for 25 years. I know a potential problem when I see one. You have to trust my instincts." Agent Chen leaned against the bulkhead, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp and unyielding. "Instincts?" He repeated the word, dripping with skepticism. "Let's talk about facts instead. Fact 1. You had a passenger with a valid scanned boarding pass and a matching government-issued ID. Fact 2. You had no credible information to suggest fraud or a security threat. Fact 3. You publicly accused her delayed boarding and attempted to unilaterally deny her entry to the aircraft in direct violation of the passenger's contract of carriage and potentially their civil rights. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Your instincts, Captain, are not a valid basis for action. My report will state that you profiled a passenger and created a volatile situation based on personal bias. Thorne's face reddened. Personal bias. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious situation, Chen retorted. What exactly was the red flag you saw? Was it her age, her clothing? Or was it the fact that you couldn't believe a young black woman would be holding a first-class ticket to Los Angeles for a NASA internship? The question was a direct hit, a verbal torpedo striking Thorne's flimsy defense below the waterline. Thorne sputtered, unable to form a coherent response. That's not it. It was her. Her demeanor. She seemed nervous. She's a 16-year-old girl flying alone to start the biggest opportunity of her life. She has every right to be nervous. Chen said, his voice dangerously low. The only person whose demeanor concerned me on that jet bridge, Captain, was yours. Your aggression, your arrogance, your immediate escalation of the situation. You are compromised. Thorne finally seemed to grasp the gravity of his predicament. This wasn't a conversation he could win. This wasn't a gate agent he could intimidate. The man in front of him held his entire career in the palm of his hand. Panic began to set in. Okay, look, Thorne said, his voice pleading now. Maybe I overreacted. It's been a stressful day. We can just let her board, and I'll forget this ever happened. No harm, no foul. Chen pushed himself off the bulkhead. We are far beyond no harm, no foul. Harm was done. You humiliated a child in public. You undermined the authority of the ground crew. And most importantly, you have proven to me that you are not in the proper emotional or psychological state to be in command of a multi-million-dollar aircraft with 247 souls on board. The finality in Chen's tone was unmistakable. This was not a negotiation. It was a verdict. "What are you saying?" Thorne asked, his voice barely audible. "I'm saying you are being removed from this flight," Chen stated. "I am officially declaring you unfit for duty. You will not be stepping foot in that cockpit." The color drained completely from Thorne's face. He looked as if he'd been punched in the gut. "You can't do that. This is my flight. I am the captain." "You were the captain," Chen corrected him. "Right now, you're a liability. Hand me your airline ID and your cockpit access credentials." For a moment, Thorne looked like he might refuse, like he might physically resist. His hands clenched into fists. He was a man whose entire identity was wrapped up in his uniform, his title, his authority. Being stripped of that in this manner was a fate worse than death. But then he looked into Agent Chen's eyes. There was no anger, no malice, just the cold, hard certainty of federal law. Thorne knew he had lost. His rebellion deflated, leaving behind a hollowed-out man. With trembling hands, he reached into his jacket, pulled out his ID lanyard, and handed it over to the Air Marshal. Chen took the credentials and spoke into the small radio on his shoulder. "Chen to O'Hare Field Office. I have a situation on Transcontinental 815 at Gate C-17. I have deemed the pilot in command, Marcus Thorne, unfit for duty. I need airline management and airport security at the gate immediately. Acknowledge." A voice crackled back in his earpiece. "Acknowledged, Chen. Units are en route. ETA 2 minutes." The reversal was total and absolute. The king had been dethroned. Agent Chen stepped out of the alcove, leaving a stunned Marcus Thorne to contemplate the wreckage of his career. He walked back to Zola, who was now being shielded by the kind elderly woman, Eleanor Vance. "Miss Johnson," Chen said, his voice once again calm and reassuring. He handed her back her boarding pass and ID. "My apologies for the delay. Captain Thorne will not be flying today. The airline is arranging for his first officer to take command, but there will be a slight delay while a new co-pilot is brought in. The flight is secure. You may board whenever you are ready. Your seat is waiting." He then addressed Sarah, the gate agent, who was watching with a stunned expression. "Please resume the boarding process for the other passengers. Management will be here shortly to assist." Sarah nodded dumbly, still trying to process the sudden dramatic shift in power. Zola looked from the powerful calm agent to the now empty space where the intimidating pilot had stood. It felt surreal, like a dream. The immense, immovable obstacle had simply been removed. She looked down at her ticket, then back at Agent Chen. "Thank you." She whispered the words, feeling inadequate. Thank you. Everyone has the right to travel with dignity, Miss Johnson," Chen replied with a small smile. "You just focus on your internship. Go show them what you've got." With a final nod, he stepped back, positioning himself discreetly near the cockpit door. His role as an unseen guardian resumed. Zola took a deep, shuddering breath, and under the approving gaze of Eleanor Vance, she turned and walked down the jet bridge. This time, no one stopped her. She stepped through the doorway of the Boeing 777 and into the calm, quiet sanctuary of the first-class cabin. A flight attendant greeted her with a warm smile, completely unaware of the drama that had just unfolded. "Welcome aboard, miss. Can I get you a pre-departure beverage?" Zola found her seat, 2A, a plush leather chair by the window. As she sank into it, the adrenaline began to fade, leaving an exhausted ache in its place. She had been tested, and she hadn't broken. But the victory felt complex, tainted by the ugliness of the encounter. She looked out the window back towards the gate, just as 2 uniformed airport police officers and a frantic-looking man in a suit arrived. A moment later, they escorted a slumped, defeated-looking Marcus Thorne off the jet bridge and away, his career ending not with a dignified retirement, but with a walk of shame through a crowded terminal. The reversal was complete. The removal of a captain from his flight is not a subtle event. It sends ripples through the rigid clockwork world of airline operations, and Flight 815 was now at the epicenter of a logistical and administrative earthquake. As Zola settled into her seat, trying to calm her racing heart, the cabin buzzed with a low murmur. Passengers in the back of the plane were growing restless, their phones out, texting about the unexplained delay. In first class, the handful of passengers who had witnessed the event spoke in hushed, incredulous tones. "Did you see that an Air Marshal? I've never seen a pilot taken off a flight before. That poor girl, Eleanor Vance, the elderly woman from the line, boarded and found her seat across the aisle from Zola. She leaned over, her face etched with concern. Are you all right, dear? That was an absolutely disgraceful display." Zola managed a weak smile. "I'm okay. Thank you for speaking up." "Nonsense," Eleanor said, waving a dismissive hand. "A little bit of decency is the least we can offer one another. That man was a bully." The new acting captain, First Officer David Reed, soon came on the intercom. He was young, his voice laced with a nervous formality. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is your first officer speaking. Apologies for the delay. We've had an unexpected crew change. A replacement co-pilot is en route to the aircraft, and we expect to be underway in approximately 45 minutes. We appreciate your patience." Crew change was the sanitized, corporate-approved term for the drama that had just transpired. Out at the gate, it was chaos. Robert Morrison, the airline's station chief at O'Hare, had arrived, his face a mask of controlled panic. He was a man who dealt with weather delays and mechanical issues, not federal interventions and accusations of discrimination. He found Sarah, the gate agent, giving a statement to Agent Chen and the airport police. She was visibly shaken, recounting Thorne's words, his aggressive tone, his refusal to listen to reason. He just kept saying it was his gut, his authority. Sarah explained, her voice trembling. "I've never seen him like that. He was so angry." Morrison pulled Agent Chen aside. "Agent, what in God's name happened here? Marcus has been flying with us for 2 decades. Chen's expression was unreadable. "What happened, Mr. Morrison, is that your captain created a security risk by profiling and harassing a minor. My full report will be filed with the TSA and the FAA within the hour. You need to focus on getting this flight out safely and taking care of the passenger your employee targeted." The mention of the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, sent a chill down Morrison's spine. This was no longer an internal HR issue. This was a regulatory nightmare in the making. "Of course, Agent. Absolutely," Morrison said, his mind already racing through damage control protocols. "We'll be speaking with the young lady. We'll do whatever it takes to make this right." He approached the jet bridge, intending to go aboard, and personally apologized to Zola, but Agent Chen subtly blocked his path. "The passenger has been through enough. Let her be. You can make things right by ensuring your company's culture doesn't allow another Marcus Thorne to get his wings." The rebuke was sharp and clear. This wasn't just about one pilot. It was about the system that enabled him. Morrison retreated humbled. He had 1,000 calls to make to corporate headquarters in Dallas, to legal, to human resources. The fallout was just beginning. Aboard the plane, Zola pulled out her phone and called the one person she knew would understand. Dr. Anya Sharma answered on the first ring. "Zola, I was just tracking your flight. It says you're delayed. Is everything all right?" Zola took a breath, and then the whole story came tumbling out, the pilot's accusations, the humiliation, the fear, and the stunning intervention by the Air Marshal. She left nothing out. On the other end of the line in her office at JPL, Dr. Sharma listened in horrified silence. When Zola finished, there was a moment of quiet fury on the line. "Zola, I am so sorry," Dr. Sharma said, her voice tight with anger. "That is unacceptable. It's monstrous. Are you okay? Do you want to get off that flight? We can book you another one. We can send a car." "No," Zola said, surprising herself with her own resolve. "I'm on the plane. I'm in my seat. I'm not letting him win. I'm coming to Pasadena." A proud smile crept into Dr. Sharma's voice. "Good. That's the spirit. You are stronger than any small-minded man in a uniform. You listen to me, Zola. When you land at LAX, there will be a car service waiting for you at baggage claim. The driver's name is Hector. He'll hold a sign with your name on it. He'll take you directly to your hotel. Get some rest. Don't even think about what happened. Tomorrow you walk into JPL with your head held high, because you belong here more than anyone I know." The conversation was an anchor in the storm. It was the reminder she needed. The incident at the gate was a momentary diversion, an ugly storm cloud she had to fly through to get to her real destination. 40 minutes later, a new co-pilot bustled onto the plane. The doors were sealed, the jet bridge pulled away, and the Boeing 777 finally pushed back. As the plane taxied towards the runway, Zola looked out the window. She saw other planes taking off, climbing gracefully into the vast blue sky. For a moment she wondered if she would ever be able to look at a pilot the same way again. But then the engines roared to life, pressing her back into her luxurious seat. The plane accelerated down the runway faster and faster, until with a gentle lift, it broke free from the earth. Chicago shrank below her, the sprawling city grid turning into a map. As the plane banked west, heading for the sun, Zola felt a sense of release. She had faced the wall, and the wall had crumbled. The fallout on the ground was no longer her problem. Her trajectory was upward onward toward the stars. For Captain Marcus Thorne, the world didn't just crumble, it vaporized. The walk from Gate C-17 to the airport's sterile security office was the longest of his life. The usual deference and respect he received while in uniform were gone, replaced by the averted gazes of his colleagues and the cold professionalism of the police officers flanking him. He was put on immediate unpaid administrative leave. By the time Flight 855 landed in Los Angeles, Transcontinental's corporate legal team was already in crisis mode. Agent David Chen's report was as damning as it was meticulous. It detailed Thorne's unprovoked verbal aggression, his creation of a hostile environment, and his discriminatory actions based on no articulable security threat. It was a career-ending document. The airline, terrified of a massive lawsuit and a PR catastrophe, launched its own internal investigation, but it was a mere formality. They interviewed Sarah, the gate agent, who tearfully corroborated every detail. They interviewed Eleanor Vance, who wrote a scathing 2-page letter to the CEO describing Thorne's behavior as a disgusting abuse of power and thinly veiled bigotry. They even pulled Thorne's personnel file. It turned out this wasn't the first time. Over his 25-year career, there had been a dozen minor complaints. A flight attendant who felt he was verbally abusive. A passenger who claimed he was dismissive and rude. A co-pilot who noted his unnecessary rigidity regarding protocol. Each incident on its own was small, a forgettable blip. But when compiled, they painted a portrait of a man with a deep-seated authority complex and a history of prejudice. He had always been protected by his seniority and his union. Until now, he had finally picked a fight in front of the wrong person. 2 weeks after the incident, Marcus Thorne was terminated from Transcontinental Airlines. He lost his multi-million-dollar pension, his health benefits, and his travel privileges. But Karma's bill was not yet paid in full. The FAA, acting on Chen's report and the airline's findings, opened its own investigation. They subjected Thorne to a battery of psychological evaluations and conduct reviews. Their conclusion was brutal. Captain Thorne exhibited signs of an authoritarian personality disorder, and his actions on Flight 859 demonstrated a catastrophic failure of judgment. His commercial pilot's license was suspended indefinitely, requiring him to undergo extensive sensitivity training and psychological counseling with no guarantee of reinstatement. At 58 years old, his career as a pilot was over. The news spread through the aviation community like wildfire. Thorne became a pariah. The friends who used to join him for drinks after a long haul stopped calling. His neighbors in his manicured suburban community started avoiding eye contact. His wife, mortified by the scandal and weary of years of his controlling behavior, finally left him. He spent his days in his empty, oversized house, watching the news and simmering in a stew of self-pity and rage. He saw himself as the victim, a man whose distinguished career was destroyed by an overzealous federal agent and a professional victim of a girl. He never once considered that his own actions, his own prejudice, were the sole cause of his downfall. One evening, about a year after the incident, he was flipping through channels when a local news segment caught his eye. It was a feature on rising stars in science and technology, and there on the screen was Zola Johnson. She wasn't a 16-year-old girl in a simple dress anymore. She was a confident 17-year-old, standing in a clean room at JPL, pointing to a component of the Mars rover she had helped design. The reporter's voiceover was glowing. Zola Johnson, once a summer intern, has now been awarded the prestigious Caltech Presidential Scholarship. Her work on optimizing power conservation for deep space probes has been called revolutionary by her mentors. Zola was speaking, her voice clear and passionate. The universe doesn't care where you come from, what you look like. It only responds to curiosity, hard work, and the rigor of mathematics. The goal is to keep reaching, to keep pushing the boundaries of what we think is possible. Thorne stared at the screen, the remote falling from his slack hand. He saw her confidence, her brilliance, her limitless future. And in that moment, for the first time, a sliver of the devastating truth pierced his fortress of denial. He hadn't just tried to stop a girl from boarding a plane. He had tried to ground a star. And the universe itself had corrected his arrogant, earthbound error. The long shadow of his karma wasn't just in what he had lost. It was in the blinding brightness of what she was becoming. He had made himself small and irrelevant while she was busy inheriting the cosmos. He reached for the bottle of whiskey on the table, the bitter taste of his own failure, the only thing left in his life. Zola Johnson walked onto the stage at the California Institute of Technology to a roar of applause. 3 years had passed since that day at O'Hare. She was no longer a high school prodigy, but a 19-year-old undergraduate researcher on the verge of co-authoring her first major paper on electromagnetic propulsion. Her braids were longer, and she wore her confidence not as a shield, but as a natural extension of herself. She was the keynote speaker for the university's Women in STEM conference. In front of her sat hundreds of young women, aspiring engineers, physicists, biologists, and mathematicians, all looking at her with the same hope and determination she once felt. She adjusted the microphone, a small, knowing smile on her lips. "Good morning," she began, her voice resonating through the auditorium. 3 years ago, I was on my way to my dream internship, and I was almost stopped, not by a complex equation, not by a failed experiment, but by a man who decided that I didn't look like I belonged in seat 2A. A hush fell over the crowd. She had rarely spoken about the incident in public, but today it felt necessary. He was a pilot, a man of authority, and he used that authority to try and block my path. He questioned my ticket, my intelligence, my very presence. He told me I wasn't getting on his aircraft. And for a few terrifying minutes I believed him. I felt small, powerless, and utterly alone. She paused, making eye contact with the students in the front row. But then something incredible happened. Someone else stepped in. An Air Marshal, a man who saw not what the pilot wanted to see, but the simple truth. He used his authority not to diminish, but to uphold, not to exclude, but to protect. He showed me that for every person who will try to build a wall in front of you, there are others who are willing to help you tear it down. That day, she continued, her voice gaining strength, I learned the most important lesson of my life, and it had nothing to do with physics. I learned that your trajectory is not defined by the obstacles placed in your way. It is defined by your response to them. It is defined by your resilience, your refusal to be grounded by someone else's small-mindedness. She spoke for 20 minutes, not just about her research, but about the importance of mentorship, the power of solidarity, and the need to build a scientific community that was as diverse as the universe it sought to explore. She never mentioned Marcus Thorne by name. He was irrelevant, a footnote in her story, a piece of turbulence on her otherwise upward journey. After her speech, as students crowded around her, asking for advice and autographs, a familiar face emerged from the side of the stage. It was Agent David Chen. He was older, with a few more grey hairs at his temples, but he had the same calm, steady presence. "Agent Chen?" Zola said, her face breaking into a wide, genuine grin. "It's just David now. I'm retired," he said, shaking her hand. "I live in the area, and when I saw you were speaking, I had to come." "That was a powerful speech, Zola." "I was just telling the truth," she replied. "I never got to properly thank you for what you did that day." David Chen shook his head. "I was just doing my job. You did the hard part. You kept your composure, and you went on to do exactly what you were meant to do, watching your career. It's been one of the highlights of mine." They stood for a moment in comfortable silence, two people linked by a single pivotal event. He, the quiet guardian who ensured her journey could begin, and she, the brilliant mind who had taken that opportunity and soared beyond anyone's imagination. Zola's dream was no longer just about reaching the stars herself. It was about paving a smoother path for the countless others who would follow. The hard karma that had struck Captain Thorne wasn't just his spectacular fall from grace. The true lasting karma was Zola's meteoric rise. It was the irrefutable living proof that you can't keep a brilliant mind, a determined spirit, or a righteous dream on the ground for long. They will always eventually find a way to fly. Zola's story is a powerful reminder that the worst moments of our lives do not have to define our destination. It's a story about the ugly face of prejudice, but it's also a testament to the quiet integrity of people like Agent Chen and the unbreakable spirit of a young woman who refused to be denied her dream. Captain Thorne's karma was swift and devastating, a direct consequence of his own hatred. But the more beautiful karma is Zola's success, the ultimate proof that talent, intelligence, and grace will always triumph over bigotry. Her journey shows us that while one person's prejudice can try to close a door, a community's support and one's own resilience can blast open the gates to the entire universe. If Zola's story of resilience and Captain Thorne's stunning downfall resonated with you, please hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that justice, however delayed, can be incredibly powerful. And don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell for more real-life stories of karma and consequence. What did you think of the Air Marshal's actions? Let us know in the comments below. Your engagement helps us bring these important stories to light. Thank you for listening.